Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, there we go. Judge Hargrove, I know you were trying to ask a question and we were having feedback and all sorts of problems. Do you want to ask your question before we get started? Did we lose her? I think we lost Judge Hargrove.
No, I just came back in. I was tired of hearing myself ask the same question 110 times. I felt like a litigant. I thought I was a litigant. Judge Harris, I am so sorry. I was trying to ask you, is it appropriate and okay for my associate judge, Caroline Freeman, to patch into this?
Yes, these are open.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I had to ask. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We are here today on the Behavioral Health Innovation and Reform Commission Subcommittee on Involuntary Commitment. Thank you all for joining us today. I think we have two very good presentations that will be both informative and helpful in what we will do going forward. First, let me introduce myself. Sarah Harris. I'm the judge of the probate court in Bibb County. Been serving on the commission since its onset, and on this committee, as many of you know, Judge Amaro, who was previously the chair of the subcommittee, had to resign from the commission to do other things. So I want to say we appreciate his service and all he did to help us move forward. And I am looking forward to leading this committee. First, I want to give a few updates. We have an update on assisted outpatient treatment, just to give you some information. The program itself is going well. Of course, I think everyone knows there were 5 areas that were awarded the grant money. We have 3 that are up and going. Columbus is going like gangbusters. They have graduated some people out of the program. They currently, as of today, have 21 participants in the program. They have that program is going really well because they were already doing some forms of outpatient treatment, so it was very familiar to them and very familiar in the area. So we're excited about what's been going on in Columbus. We also have one down in Thomasville. They have, I don't have the updated figures, but they had about 6 or 7 participants at this point. They were a little slower start because we've had hiring issues, lots of things like that going on, but I think that they're fully staffed, and I think Mr. Lynch, who's on, can verify that. They are fully staffed and have hit the ground running. And then in Augusta, in Richmond County, they also have about 17 participants. And of course, that number fluctuates because you have people graduating out of the program, people coming back into the program, and they have gotten off to a good start. The 2 other programs, Pinelands and the one in Gilmer County, Highland Rivers, they have had a slower start. They have had staffing issues trying to find staff. The workforce is a huge problem here. So we're looking at some other alternatives and ways to help them. We've been providing, when I say we, I'm really referring to DBHGD. They have been providing support services. Judge D'Antonio in Columbus has worked very hard to get uniform forms and training to court-appointed attorneys and to attorneys representing each of the various entities. So assisted outpatient treatment is going well and moving forward. I don't know if the commissioner had a conflict today, and I don't think he has been able to join us, and sends his apologies. So he was going to give us an update on kind of what's been going on since the last commission report, but we're going to defer that for now until our next meeting. And I just see that Todd Lynch put in here that in the Thomasville area, there are 15 clients that are active or in various state of investigation, referral, et cetera. So that's the update there. I'd like to call on Nora Lott Haynes to give us a little bit of an update of the ODR program that is going on in Rockdale County. Nora, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay, great. Well, as you know, the Opening Doors to Recovery project was started as a demonstration project through NAMI, and we were looking at participants who had serious and persistent mental illness that were recycling in and out of the hospitals. Then we did the randomized controlled trial, and as you know, ODR is now an evidence-based practice. So we started doing ODR about a year ago in Rockdale County, and it is going fabulously. We are not using the same group of the same population. We're using people who are involved in the criminal justice system, whether they're on probation or whether they're in jail. So that program is going very, very well. They have a full caseload and a huge waiting list. We are trying to get funding to have another team, but I just wanted to mention two things. The number one roadblock for them is housing, of course. We still have a very difficult time finding safe and appropriate housing. The other issue, since we're doing this part of the project with people that are involved with the criminal justice system, is that these people have numerous warrants for their arrest for different things. But when they come into the ODR project, the navigators don't know that because the warrants went to a past address or they've been homeless or whatever. So one of the major roadblocks is them disappearing into some jurisdiction that we didn't even know they had a warrant. But we are really opening doors to recovery. The Rockdale County is just gangbusters. It is going great. I am so proud.
We have a question. Can you just briefly speak to how people actually get into the ODR program?
They are referred either by the jail there in Rockdale. They are referred by the court or probation, pardons and paroles. So as I said, these are people involved with the criminal justice system. So that's where they're coming from.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that report. I'm going to move on pretty quickly because we do have a hefty agenda with a lot of things going on. I want to first introduce two people, Julia Fisher-Strauss and Carlton Coleman. They are both with the Division of Aging, Department of Human Services. Julia is the Associate General Counsel, and she has been doing this for a very long time because I feel like I've known her forever, as has Carlton Coleman. Carlton is the Public Guardianship Office Section Manager, and he is known to the probate courts as our savior because he can make magic happen when he needs to. Both are dedicated public service, and we really appreciate them being here today. They're going to talk to us a little bit about the impact on DHS and the Guardianship Office and DHS in general, Division of Aging, how mental health and behavioral health is impacting what they do. And they often are faced with persons that they have to take over taking care of, or being responsible for care of persons with serious and persistent mental illness. They may also have intellectual disabilities. They're very difficult placements and the problems that they have. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and I don't know who's going to start, so I will just let y'all begin, and then of course we'll have questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Judge Harris. And thank you to the moderator for helping to display our presentation. Thank you so much for that introduction. Yes, we are with the Department of Human Services, and there's maybe some new information from some of you, although obviously talking to our esteemed judges, we're going to have some information that's known to you, but there's a lot of misperceptions about guardianship and some data that we want to share. So we can jump right into it. And I will speak first, and then my esteemed colleague, Mr. Coleman, will be presenting you some data around the services that his section provides. So next slide, please. As was mentioned, we are with the Division of Aging Services, which is within the Department of Human Services. We are the lesser known and smaller unit than the Division of Family and Children Services. We serve a number of roles, including administering the Older American Act programs, Adult Protective Services, and serve as the guardian of last resort. And we are DHS, Stronger Families for a Stronger Georgia. Next slide, please. So we're breaking this presentation up into 3 basic sections. As we are talking a lot about the agency and serving as guardian of last resort, I wanted a quick refresher for this esteemed panel about the parameters and limitations on guardianship. This is a lot of what there's misperceptions of in the public, and that impacts the second part in which Mr. Coleman is going to speak about agency data and issues encountered, and some of those are because of some of the misperceptions about what a guardian can and cannot do. And then we hope to have time to take questions and have an amazing discussion and maybe brainstorm some things about this topic to help this committee. So let's jump right into it and go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, I wanted to frame the topic. The issue of guardianship is often miscategorized in the public, and that's some of what we encounter issues with, especially it's compounded when we're dealing with behavioral health and mental health issues, and those with persistent and serious mental illness. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take a moment, and forgive me, please. I'm going to pretend to be a law professor here. So we're going to start with a hypothetical here that jumps right into the behavioral health issues. So I frame this as Bert's tricky situation. So let's look at what's going on with Bert. Bert has a long history of mental illness. He's an adult. He's not a child. He has been put under a 1013 involuntary hold and placed temporarily at Central State. He was there obviously for evaluation and treatment. And let's say at that point in time, his mother goes to the probate court to become his legal guardian and is granted a legal guardianship. Then at that point, as you know, he's been in the hospital, he's been stabilized. The hospital determines that he no longer qualifies as involuntary, that status is concluded. So Central State goes to his legal guardian, and she says, well, I'm his guardian. I want him to be there voluntarily. If we could go to the next slide, please. So laying those things out very quickly, we've got Bert on one side. Mental illness, long history, would qualify under that serious and persistent. Declared incompetent or incapacitated under this guardianship action. Doctors say he no longer qualifies for involuntary, but he says he doesn't want to be voluntary. On the other side, his legal guardian, his mother, known him his entire life, loves him, cares for him, has this additional legal authority. She wants him to stay there, thinks that he needs more treatment. She has a legal obligation to look for his best interest, And so she says it's voluntary. So you can look from the two sides of this column that, well, it can't both be he says it's not voluntary and the legal guardian says it's voluntary. So next slide, please. As you may have assumed, this was a real case. If you are not familiar, we're talking about Herbert instead of Bert Heichelbeck versus David Evans. This was a case in the federal court in the Middle District of Georgia. This was back in 1992. It is still good law. It has not been relitigated as an issue in Georgia, and there are other jurisdictions that have followed this case as well. So let's look at some of the language that came out from this court decision. Next slide. So part of the court's ruling, and there's a lot of great language in this ruling, the court said it is true when a court appoints a guardian for an incapacitated person, that person loses certain rights under Georgia law. For example, the ward loses the power to consent to medical treatment and the power to establish a residence. However, there is a big difference between the right to challenge one's involuntary confinement in a mental hospital and the right to establish a residence, and to require the individual so confined to obtain the consent of their keepers in order to launch such or those challenges would render the right meaningless. There's a lot of good language in that decision as well that clearly states that an adult ward relationship to a guardian is not that of a child to a parent. Next slide. So in this case, the court agreed with Mr. Heichelbeck that even though he had been declared to be incapacitated by a court, he was under a legal guardianship, the patient had the constitutionally protected interest in being free from involuntary confinement. That due process rights, constitutional rights, require that the patient be afforded at least a proceeding to challenge his confinements, even against the wishes of his legal guardian. And the court rules that the policy of only discharging or affording a commitment hearing upon the request of the legal guardian violated the patient's constitutional due process and deprived him of that right. So there's a lot that we deal with, especially dealing with the public, in regard to thinking that a legal guardian is equivalent to being able to involuntarily confine a patient. Next slide, please. So just very fast, going through a little bit more about what is a guardianship and some pieces of the guardianship law. Next slide, please. No presumptions of a need for a guardianship. And we're going to talk again about these behavioral health and mental health issues. The law in the first code section in chapter 4 of Title 29 talks about what there's not a presumption that somebody needs a guardian for. Now, these things can be used as evidence towards needing a guardianship, but you're not presumed to need a legal guardian because you've been found at finding of criminal insanity, because of a finding of incompetence to stand trial, or, and this part I have here in purple is not as easy to read when you go to the code section, so the casual reader gets a little confused. But it says that no adult is presumed to be in need of a guardian due to a finding of need for treatment or services under, and then there's a laundry list of Title 37. There's just a long list that cites and sends you into different chapters of Title 37, which those of us on this meeting know that that is your behavioral health, mental health, developmental disabilities, and addictive diseases. So that's what, there's no presumption, and then it just gives you a whole bunch of numbers, and then you have to click to those chapters to see it's due to those conditions and seeking treatment for those conditions. There is no definition of serious and persistent mental illness in the guardianship code itself. And that no adult is presumed to be needed to need a guardian until that's been adjudicated by a court here in Georgia or similarly in another state. Next slide, please. There's a lot of constitutional due process that is wrapped up in these findings for a court to determine that a guardian is needed. It is a serious legal action. It's not just a simple solution to resolve a situation. Some of the constitutional due process that's tied in is that the notice requirements. This is not to be done in secret, in private. There's notice required on the proposed ward, notice on the legal spouse and all adult children, or at least 2 other adults on the list of those who know and are familiar with the proposed ward. that there's counsel appointed to the proposed ward to protect their rights, similar to that of a public defender. And that there's a court-initiated medical evaluation. A lot of other civil matters, a court is just making a decision between what's presented to them. But with the option of having a guardian ad litem, which is different than a court-appointed counsel, and the independent medical review, the court is initiating evidence that doesn't come from either the proposed ward or the petitioners to get their own evidence to ensure that they're evaluating the appropriate needs. Next slide, please. Some of the general and optional restrictions that come when a guardianship is imposed over an individual. They cannot consent or make contracts for himself or herself, which, you know, whenever we do anything include applying for and using a credit card, there's terms and conditions. You have to be able to consent to things. Cannot hire professionals because that's a contractual relationship that you're bringing in. The right to marry is or can be restricted. There might be a prohibition from voting. It's not automatic in Georgia as it is in other states, but that is an option of the court. And the fact that a guardianship exists is sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigations to go on the background check for purchasing and carrying firearms. It has to do with your constitutional right to carry. Next slide. And very quickly moving through as well, guardianship might not be what at least some people perceive it to be. There are certain rights that the ward always, or the person under guardianship always retains. One is to communicate freely and privately with persons other than the guardian, unless there's a court order stating otherwise. The right to the least restrictive form of guardianship, that it not be assumed to be plenary, and the right to be restored to capacity at the earliest possible time, which is also an issue when we're dealing with mental health cases, that the capacity of the individual changes frequently. Things also when we deal with dementia, which we don't know the rate of decline of the dementia. Other rights that are rights that are included in the obligation of the guardian are that the guardian shall encourage the ward to participate in decisions, must consult with the ward, to act on the ward's own behalf to the extent possible, and to develop and regain the capacity to manage that person's own personal affairs. And that the guardian shall consider the expressed desires and personal values of the ward. Next slide, please. Some things that a guardian is not responsible for, which include controlling the acts or omissions of the person under guardianship. That a legal guardian does not have the ability to prevent the behaviors and actions of somebody just pursuant to the sheet of paper from the court. So those acts could include violent behaviors, commissions of crimes, absconding, or what we would say, running away, not letting someone know where they are, refusing medication and treatment. The guardian is not responsible for paying for the needs of the person under guardianship if the ward does not have the funding to pay for himself or herself, which includes housing, supervision, medical care, includes some of the debts or obligations of the person under guardianship, which could include child support obligations, probation fees, or bankruptcy that was initiated before the guardianship. And the ward is entitled to the best care that his or her income and resources can afford, which includes also making applications for programs that are available, public benefits and resources. And the guardian is not responsible for the acts or omissions in the act of the guardian. That's if they're acting in their fiduciary duty, making best efforts and acting in full faith and good faith to fulfill duties. Next slide, please. So I won't go through all of this for you. This is a wonderful slide that Mr. Coleman shared with me. But some of you who aren't familiar with us might be asking, well, what does the Department of Human Services have to do with all this? Well, if the court has gone through their process, there's really two determinations. Does the person need a guardian, and to what extent? And if that's needed, who would be that appropriate guardian? And in the state of Georgia, there's a long list of preferences of who should be guardian or could be guardian. But if there's no one that's willing and able or available, then what happens? Well, then the law has that the Department of Human Services can be appointed as guardian of last resort. And so I can tell you, and Mr. Coleman can tell you, and Judges Harris and Hargrave can tell you that happens a lot, that there is no one else available to be guardian. So this small section of this small part of the Department of Human Services gets appointed guardian quite often and in growing numbers, and that the number of persons under this guardian of last resort with these mental health, behavioral health, severe and persistent mental illness continues to grow. Next slide, please. So I put this picture on there because you can tell it's a conflict a lot. What can the legal guardian do now that you've seen the parameters of guardianship, some of the misperceptions in the public about guardianship? Now I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Coleman, who's going to get into some data and examples about what the department's amazing guardianship unit does in these situations and what they're dealing with. So, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. Good afternoon, everyone. As Judge Harris stated in her introduction, I'm a Coleman, the Public Guardianship Office Section Manager. And one thing that I will correct her on here is that I am not a savior. I consider myself just a layperson in the field doing what I can to help those who are less fortunate for themselves. And I am very appreciative of having had the opportunity to work with all of the probate court judges statewide to make sure that we do the best we can for those who cannot speak or do for themselves. Next slide, please. One thing that I would like to start off with some data from the Division of Aging Services for our Public Guardianship Office, which is the ward, and we refer to our clients as wards. Age breakdown, if you look at FY 2018, we only had 94% of clients in our program age 18 to 29, 376, which was 40.21% of clients age 30 to 59, and 465, which is 49.74% of clients who were age 60 plus. If you go over to FYI 23, you will see that those numbers have grown. You have 119 clients that are now ages 18 to 29, 30 to age 59 is up to
It appears, I'm not sure if I'm frozen or just Mr. Coleman's frozen.
I think he's frozen.
Okay, I know we were discussing our internet woes earlier today. As you can see, and the numbers that he's pointing out, especially the younger populations, as was mentioned, the guardianship office is within the Division of Aging Services. So you assume a lot of older persons. The numbers of persons under 60, and especially those under the age of 30, have been growing dramatically, which is a different population than this office dealt with often, especially in the time that Mr. Coleman has been here and been at the helm. So then the numbers, and it looks low, but I also I don't believe that any new staff positions have been added as well to the guardianship office since about the fiscal year 2020 time period. The numbers in all categories, with a little bit of fluctuation due to COVID, have been growing, but especially those younger numbers overall as a part of the population. I don't know if Mr. Coleman has been able to get back on yet.
Let's see.
I hesitate to move on in case there's something else he wants to talk about with this slide. but
I don't see him on. Why don't you,
Okay.
if you can wing it until he can get back on, that would be great.
I can try to wing it if we can go to the next slide. Part of that that shows some of the numbers dramatically coming up has to do with some young persons aging out of foster care. Then we have it on here, and this is only started to track recently, are the numbers of guardianships and referrals that have come as referrals from the Division of Family and Children's Services for young people aging out of foster care. You see not much going on in the fiscal year 18 to 22 time period. And then this fiscal year that just ended a few weeks ago, there were 22 referrals. All of these individuals aging out of foster care would be in the 18 to 21 or 22 age range. Most of them have complex needs, which include behavioral health needs. So next slide, please. And one of the issues that comes with that, especially for those with who do not have developmental disability diagnosis, but especially the extreme behavioral health, mental health diagnosis, is in the time period that they were under DFACS care, whether that be foster care or extended use services. There's federal funding for that program, that many of those are receiving extreme services, which could be residential placement and services. Usually those residential treatment facilities are only for those in the up to 20 or around their time period. Some were receiving one-on-one direct supervision 24/7 or 2-on-1. And then once they age out of qualification for those programs, which receive federal and state funding, then what? Guardianship is not a federal program, is not similar, is not the adult version of foster care. It's not a funded program and doesn't have funding for those services. Now, those who have developmental disabilities, there's the possibility, if they're able to receive the new options waiver, the comprehensive waiver, the now or comp waivers, and transition into those services. But when you think about probably presentations you've heard and the young people with extreme behavioral health issues, the question is, when that youth funding expires, what then? What are the services available then? Has Mr. Coleman been able to come back on yet? No? Okay. Let's see. So let's see, I guess next slide, we'll have to make note of where we were when Mr. Coleman's internet went out. Mr. Coleman and I were discussing the cycle of placement issues that repeats itself over and over again, especially for those young and able-bodied individuals that come under guardian of last resort. So looking at this cycle, usually it's very difficult to find any placement or placement available, and it's not specifically designed for their behavioral health issues or needs, but it's all that Carlton's unit is able to locate with a bed availability that can be afforded. So they go to that placement, which means eventually some sort of behavioral health issue, mental health regression will occur. And that usually results in some sort of damage to property, harm to self, or harm to others. That those are what happens in that placement that's not designed to address their needs as they're building up. That means that the individual is displaced from that facility, either an involuntary mental health hold to a hospital. It could be for physical injuries as well, or to jail for as an adult for the consequences of the crime that their outburst created. Then what happens is they're in the jail or in the hospital, and that jail or hospital determines that they don't need to be there anymore. They don't meet the acute care needs of the hospital. The jail says this person needs treatment, not to be jailed, and they end up calling if we're already appointed guardian, or seeking the department to be appointed guardian, and the cycle begins again, because there are not, as was mentioned, housing options, especially housing options that meet the specific needs of this population group. One thing, and Carl is being modest, but that happens at the part that the star is the ability of the guardianship staff to locate a bed, which is very, very difficult, usually in a personal care home, assisted living community. What they can find is our unit makes a point of making sure to communicate the specific past behaviors of the potential resident. You can't hide those. They're going to find out anyway. So convincing those persons that to take on our client and agree to let them move in to their facility or unit can be very, very difficult. But the guardianship office is able to handle that. Okay, next slide, please. So, and Mr. Coleman would better be able to describe some of these numbers as well. I think that these numbers represent the person's, this is not the initial finding of placement. Once the department is appointed guardian, usually it's an evaluation of, is that person able to stay where they are? What kind of housing do they need if they have a housing need? And the time it takes to locate that housing initially is very great. But then these are some numbers, some data pulled on persons who then were displaced and relocated at least once, often more than once, within a 365-day period. So not the initial finding of housing, but those that move at least once or more than once during that time period. And I wish there was data, but we don't have the ability to pull on how long it takes to find another placement, once that person has been displaced. And again, a lot of these have been temporarily in some sort of either involuntary confinement, hospital, or in a jail. And next slide. Placement issues that are encountered frequently by the staff of the guardianship office. The lack of availability, lack of licensed affordable housing options, again, that this is within the resources of the individual or other public resources that are available. In particular, for persons whose income is only SSI or no income. The department is often appointed when a person does not have income or has not applied for or been approved for disability benefits. Some counties or region of the state may only have one or no such licensed facilities. Another common placement issue would be dealing with comorbidities, that individuals have multiple conditions and what facility or placement will take those conditions. Psychiatric hospital might not take someone who's medically not stable, and a nursing facility might not take someone who's psychiatrically not stable. Another conversation that Mr. Coleman and I were having, and I think he has some additional data on, is when somebody who has a long history of mental health conditions is increasing in age and develops dementia or Alzheimer's. There's often a fight over how to serve that person and what sort of program or facility might be willing or available to take that individual. And transfer. We do notice that, or the guardianship office notices that facilities, facility owners and administrators talk. And a person's name might be shared amongst facilities. which makes it harder and more and more difficult to find available places in a local region, which often leads to the guardianship office having to move a person over long distances. And that might be away from friends or family who may have a positive benefit if they'd be able to benefit or to visit an individual, but because of the lack of resources of placements in the area, they ended up having to be moved further away. Next slide, please. Maintaining the placement. Again, as different than a lot of Division of Aging Services, clients who traditionally are older with more physical disabilities, especially for our younger and mentally difficult crowd, elopement, running away, leaving the residence, not letting anyone know where they're going, to basically becoming a missing person. Disruption of the placement due to their behaviors, breaking the house rules, often violent outbreaks, a symptom of the disability that led to the guardianship in the first place. And as an example, someone with increasing dementia or Alzheimer's might have those same sort of outbursts that they may have been easier to house before the increase of their dementia, but leads to the behavioral issues of hitting, cursing at the staff, those sort of issues. And as I'm sure has been talked about in this committee as well, workplace or workforce shortages and provider shortages. Even if there is a facility, they're reducing their capacity because they are short-staffed. The staff are not trained or able to handle behaviors, especially if the facility traditionally was working with older persons. And that if they are trying to handle the client with the behavioral issues, it takes away time and care from other residents, and that person can become a threat to other residents. I see Mr. Coleman has come back on the line. We have continued to move forward, Carl. If there's anything in the slides, I think, where were we? 18 through 24. That you want to go back to, but I have now gotten through slide 24.
All right, thank you, Julia. I do apologize, everyone. This has never happened to me before, but I guess Murphy Law is always available and standing in the wings. So I just hope and pray I get through it this time without it going out again. I had notes on my slides, Julia, and I think we're at a good point where I came back in, because I will add to the example of discharge and disruptive placements, where the client could also be discharged for destroying property, causing other concerns by consumers in the home that would allow them to be fearful because of behavior, as well as allegations made against the provider or staff in the home of abuse and neglect, and even assaulting a staff or other consumers, which could cause the individual to be arrested. Did you get through the entire slide, Julie?
Yes, without your notes, but yes, I did.
Okay. Okay, next slide. So we know that some facilities are not specialized for care, or they could be negligent, because they're not designed to meet the needs of the clients due to their medical and or behavior issues. However, when we're as guardian of last resort, we're under so much pressure to find placement till we have to tap into placement resources that we'll consider on a trial basis to care to try these individuals in their homes, but they may not always be designed to care for them. And we also have where it may be injuries that are gone unreported in the home due to the hands of another consumer or due to the hands of the provider that we don't always know about. Next slide. And this is the biggest one for us. Jails and hospitals, they are not appropriate for placement resources. However, they do end up receiving a lot of our clients. One of the issues is that because of the mental health behaviors exhibited by clients, they can be arrested and held in jail. And that leads to further decompensation because they're not able to get their medications. We have providers who are not able to manage clients' behaviors, and they will take them and just drop them off at local hospitals and refuse to take them back into the home. And if they're medically cleared, they're left sitting in the lobby or off to the side of a room in the ER until placement is located. And that becomes a barrier and a disconnect with working with providers or those stakeholders at the hospitals and jails, because they get to the point they're frustrated. They want that individual out of their facility or out of the hospital because they're not getting any money for housing this individual. And they start pointing the blame at the department. And when we try to tell them we're working on a placement and we don't have ready available placement, they don't want to hear that. They want to know, when are you coming to get them and how soon can you get here? As we were preparing for this, I thought back to a couple of years ago where I thought I was going to enjoy Veterans Day, and I got a call about 9:30 in the morning from a hospital administrator that told me, I am giving you until 5 o'clock to find a placement for this client or come get them today. And if you're not here by 5 or this patient is not out of my facility today at 5, I will personally call and have you arrested. So I spent my holiday looking for a placement resource for the client who had been dropped off at the ER because of displayed behaviors. Worked 10 minutes to 3, found a placement, called the administrator, said, okay, I found a possible placement. Now I'm trying to work on a transportation company that will transport the client to the new placement on the holiday. Was able to get a transportation company within 10 minutes left to get that patient out of the hospital, to agree to pick that patient up, had the patient relocated, and within 24 hours, the patient was in a hospital at the new location displaying the same behaviors. That is very discouraging when we continue to find placement and go through the exact same cycle. Also, to give you just a couple of examples of how difficult placement have been, we have had a client that we became the guardian through a petition filed by one hospital. We were working to find placement for that client to be discharged from that hospital. Well, before we could do that, the client assaulted a hospital staff person, and that person pressed charges against that client. The client was arrested, placed in jail. The social worker at the jail realized that the client was not appropriate for the jail because of her behavior and condition, and actually had her sent back to another hospital. And we ended up having to work closely with that hospital to get that client out. Her behavior was so bad in the hospital until the hospital had to go into her room, take the metal frame out of the room, and only leave the mattress and the floor for the client to rest on. Her behavior continued to get so bad until the hospital had to send a round-the-clock, one-on-one sitter to be with her at all times. We were exhausted on how to try to find placement. Referrals were sent out to 43 facilities trying to get appropriate placement for her, and all 43 facilities denied her. It was not until that I was told about what is known as an order to apprehend, or OTA, by a judge, that I was able to take another staff person to the hospital. And when we walked in the room, I didn't think we were going to be successful because she remembered me from the hearing. And when I walked in, she said, "Oh, you're the good looking man." I stepped out of the room and allowed her to talk with the second individual that went in with me. And just as I walked back in the room, I heard her say she wanted to kill herself. And I asked her to repeat that, and she said it. I was able to tell her, "I don't want you to do anything. I'm going to go get you some help." We went to the court and completed that affidavit for the order to apprehend, and she was successfully transported from the hospital to a regional hospital where she has maintained some stability, and they are working with her now to get her back out into the community. Had it not been for the judge telling me to try an OTA for this patient, we would still be having an issue with that hospital. So the OTAs have become a norm for us, but it's very challenging when they have these mental health behaviors and placements are turning us down, or they're saying, yes, we'll try them, and they're taking them back and dropping them off at the hospital saying that individual's behavior is much more than we can handle. It is also discouraging when family members may have guardianship of their loved one, and they are having them placed in a hospital for stabilization. And the hospital, after 5 to 7 days, are saying, okay, they're stable, they're ready for discharge, come get them. The family members are saying, I can't cope or handle their behavior. The hospital is saying, you need to give up guardianship, and the family go and get guardians, give up the guardianship, and we are appointed as guardian of last resort. The minute the hospital knows that that has occurred, they're telling us to come get them. We've had that to happen in one county with one judge where the hospital administrator called me and wanted me to give approval to allow them to release a 21-year-old and allow them to be placed in a homeless shelter in downtown Atlanta. And when I said absolutely not, they called the judge and complained to the judge about what the guardian was not doing. The judge decided to do a conference call, and I had to explain, we do not have ready available placement, and I do not want to jeopardize this young individual's life by putting them in a homeless shelter where they can be subjected to being injured overnight or any other harm being done. The judge agreed with me, and the judge was trying to get the administrator to agree to continue to hold the individual until we could find the placement. And that administrator said, I'll do one better for you. If he is not picked up out of our facility by in the morning, I will put him in a cab and have him delivered to the steps of the probate court tomorrow. And that is exactly what that administrator of that hospital did, because that administrator's concern was, we're not getting any federal dollars by having this client here. That is an issue when money is more important than the safety and welfare of the clients that we serve. And I could go on, but I think I'll stop here. Next slide, please. So again, most licensed personal care homes are designed only for elderly. When you think about it, that our population now is becoming younger and younger with mental health diagnosis and autism diagnosis, we're having to look at those personal care homes. And that poses a problem because you have a young clientele in the home with elderly clients, and those clients, like I stated before, become fearful of those clients. Right now, we have 50.05% of current PGO clients who are under the age of 60, and 49.95% of our current PGO clients are the age of 60 above. We're almost at an equal balance, 50% balance of our clientele population. Personal care homes do not have the staffing to handle the behavior issue outbursts that are experienced by clients with behavior issues. And we have a limited number of personal care homes willing to accept and provide care for individuals with behavior health issues. They also have a tendency to have a gender preference. I only want to take females. I only want to take males. I only want elderly clients. I only want young clients. I want somebody who is pretty much really self-sufficient and can do for themselves, because I don't have the appropriate staff to constantly manage and oversee everyone in the home. So we also have a lot of factors that come into play when we're trying to place our clients. We also have licensed personal care homes operate within a network. So providers talk, especially when the homes are within close proximity. They will end up saying, no, I can't take him because isn't she the one that came from Sally's home? Oh no, I've heard about them. That's a real difficult client. I don't want them. So they're not willing to house our clients if they know that a behavior issue exists. Even though we try to explain to them all behavior issues, all medical issues with the clients, they still refuse if that client has been labeled within that provider network as a difficult or a very behavior type individuals. Next slide, please. And our last one is that personal care providers who are willing to house clients with behavioral health diagnosis, they have a tendency to want a higher daily rate. Clients with behavioral health diagnosis are also known to PGO and are on low income. The average client that we have, monthly income starts at $788 a month. The starting rate for a personal care home, monthly rate, is $2,000. If that client has a behavior issue, that provider will try to charge as high as $35 and $3,500. And when I say the $2,000 monthly rate, that is for a semi-private room. The $3,500 rate goes up because they will say, because of that individual's diagnosis, I can't put them in a room with someone else. I have to put them in a room by themselves. So that's tied into being able to generate more income, because I can't split that room up and have another person in it. If that client is difficult and we have to find a placement for them, we have to try to work with these providers and ensure that the client's needs are met. Next slide. So again, I apologize for having such computer technical difficulties, but we're at our point where we have questions and discussions.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to ask a quick question just to wrap a few things up that you said. First, can you address how your Division of Aging Services or the Public Guardianship Office works with DBHCD on some of these issues? I know often, especially for the younger people, they are not qualified for the comp waiver or any of those. And so they start out with zero income, and correct me if I'm wrong, they start out with zero income. So you have no income, then how do you find a placement? And do you have a, for lack of a better word, inside track with DBHCD services, whether it's DD or mental health, to try to get assistance on that side?
For those individuals that do not have any income and we determine that they may qualify for a comp now waiver, we try to work with DBHCD to get everything in place to get them qualified for that comp now waiver, but that can take time because you have to have the high school transcripts, you have to have evaluations done. So until we can get that approved, we try to place them within a personal care home until that waiver is approved and we're able to get them placed. We have one now that we got him, very young man, was actually a transfer from another state that mom was working with, say she had services for him in another state, but when she got here with him, there was no services available. And we ended up becoming the guardian of him. And we had to place him in a personal care home. We worked with DBHCD, got him approved for the now comp waiver. We're still going through the application phase, and we're hoping soon to have him placed. But we have had situations where there was no income, no one would take the client. The client came to us from the hospital, so the client had to stay in the hospital until we got all those factors put in place. Due to the fact that there was no income, the behavior was in the developmental delay diagnosis was such that unless she was in some type of DBHCD approved facility, her needs could not be met. So she stayed in the hospital to the point that we got everything in place for her to transfer into an appropriate home setting. But that also renders a problem because when you have those type of situations and a client has been in the hospital setting for long, the hospital staff becomes so attached to that client that when the client goes to a home setting, the hospital staff will go and visit, but then they try to interfere and dictate what should go on in the home. But those type settings are the issues of what we've been faced with the most when you, like you say, when you don't have income, we have to work with DBHDD to get them those waivers. Our program is regional based, which means that we have supervisors and case managers in regions throughout the state. We work well with some DBHDD providers throughout the state. Some DBHDD regions we have not had to have any involvement with, and then some we can do it on a network basis. If I know someone in one region, I can call them and they'll put me in contact with who I need to contact in that region to get assistance.
So to briefly add on to that, yes, Mr. Coleman's staff are very familiar if the individual might qualify or could qualify for the now or comp waivers. But as he said, usually when the department becomes appointed guardian, all we get are the guardianship papers to start. And the department does not have a background with that individual. And even though we work well with the DBHDD staff, there are requirements for qualifying for a waiver that require, information about the diagnosis and treatment prior to, and I'm going to blank on the age right now because I'm asking you a question, but you have to have that background information. You have to have the birth certificate, social security number. Sometimes the department's appointed with none of that information. So it is a process of obtaining that. There's no setting that we know of or fast track that can go without that information. Yes, and Ms. Diaz corrected me with the age 26 or diagnosis before 23. So it is gathering that information up because there's not a special category of any sort of Medicaid or service just for persons under guardianship. Guardianship is not a category. And so people think that, oh, the state can help and we can work with if this person had DFACS history or had DBHDD history. Departments are willing to share that information with us as available, but it depends on it being available. And then as we know for the just behavioral health clients will not qualify for that now or comp waiver, there's not a similar waiver in Georgia to meet those needs if they don't have the developmental disabilities.
Ms. Diaz?
Thank you. I was actually going to ask about that, if you could speak a little bit on the difficulties when there's someone who has an intellectual or developmental disability and also a severe persistent mental illness, but doesn't qualify for a waiver. How like some of the barriers, I guess, that if you see that and how is that affecting the services for the person?
Sorry, I muted myself because we were having the lawn service out near our office. I think the biggest barrier for us with trying to help that individual is when we have to have those school records. And the client is not able to tell us what school they attended. If there was family members, the family members can't remember what school they're attending. So we're having to just feel our way through that process to get those records to start that process. I remember one we had a couple of years ago that pretty much made statewide attention of a young lady that we were trying to work with her to get a company waiver for her. And it was a nightmare trying to find out where to start with what school, because she was not able to tell us, but she would have been raised by her grandmother who had passed away. And when the grandmother passed away, the mother came back in and the mother had no knowledge of where to start with her child.
We have a quote. Oh, go ahead.
I just would add on that is compounded with persons coming from other states as well. Although Mr. Coleman and his team are very good contacting Georgia vital records to get a birth certificate. We've got Social Security on the national level, but when an individual did not grow up in Georgia, but they're here at this point and need the guardian at this point, guardian of last resort, especially getting those past medical records, school records, vital records, having basically to search nationally or maybe multiple states, that delays things as well.
We do have a question. Why, I'm just reading the question, why does DFACS, or I think they're referring to food stamps, not honor guardianships? And they're saying they won't communicate with the guardian. You may or may not know the answer to that question.
I am not familiar with that one.
I mean, our within Carlton's staff with the guardianship office often are doing applications for food stamps that are a first application, or the person may have had that beforehand. And I think part of that is just working through the process. As was mentioned, food stamps doesn't have a special category for you qualify if you're under a guardian. So it's just the normal application process. But I'm not familiar with the not communicating. It is still an application process to meet the federal requirements for food stamps or any other public benefit.
And the same would apply if we had to apply for Medicaid or nursing home Medicaid. We still have to go through that process with DFACS.
All right, Ms. Diaz.
Thank you. Sorry, I just have one last question. For people who cycle in and out of facilities and jails, do you know if there's assistance with being connected to ACT services or intensive case management, or if that's been very difficult?
From our experience, we do connect them with ACT, and ACT does come out and assess them and make a determination if they need immediate intervention or if they can set them up to get the service they need on a routine basis. The majority of our clients that cycle in and out of jail, once they're out of jail and we try to place them before we can get them hooked up with the needed services, they have either eloped from their placement or are back in jail. So that's why we continue to have that cycle, and that continuance of being incarcerated has to do with the fact of behaviors. When we're getting in, we're assaulting other consumers in the home, or we're assaulting staff, we're verbally aggressive to staff. And a lot of our clients, unfortunately, when we go out, they've gone through that cycle so much with ACT services until they have become masterminds at manipulating the system. They exhibit their behavior, and once ACT team comes out to talk to them, they calm down, no further intervention. ACT team says they're fine, they leave. And we've had sometime ACT team have to come out within a 24-hour period for the same individual due to the same behaviors.
Just to clarify, I think you're referring, Mr. Coleman, I think you're referring to the mobile crisis.
Yes.
Right. Let me just, I wanted to clarify something that Ms. Strauss, that you talked about. There is a distinction within the mental health code that a guardian can present a person for an evaluation to determine if they need further treatment. So, in other words, they can't consent to treatment for them in the mental health system and consent that they be voluntarily or involuntarily committed. They can consent for them to be evaluated, and then the regular involuntary treatments would go forward, where they would be given all of their rights in due process.
Yes,
just so
absolutely.
that distinction, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that there is a little fine line of distinction there. I would also add that, and even when I was practicing law, I never encouraged anyone to get a guardianship over someone with a severe mental illness because of all the problems, sometimes more problems than it was worth. However, I have seen that getting medical records and being able to at least speak to medical providers is a big plus for those people who suffer from severe and persistent mental illness and the families as they're trying to get help for them. That sometimes helps. Just like Mr. Coleman's example about, I know we had one that was every time they would come out and assess them, they could pull it together, and the minute they'd leave, there was some problem with them. Those types of situations the families see, and sometimes the provider in a quick 15-minute interview doesn't see. So that's not the best reason to get a guardianship, but it is one of the reasons I think that some families do try to seek guardianships over those people with mental illness, especially those with the serious persistent mental illness and those with these behavioral and intellectual delays. Do I have any other questions from our committee members? One final question I have: is there anything that you can see, whether it is, and you can say, I'll get back with you on this, that the commission can recommend that would be helpful for the Division of Aging, which seems like is the wrong way to refer to it anymore? You're much more than that. Is there anything legislatively? Is there a way that we can build better bridges, working together with DBHCD? I know that there's a long waiting list for Comp Now waivers and all of those things. And I know there's a prioritization of those things, but I'm not sure all of that. But if you have any suggestions, ideas, things that would streamline this process. I know that you spend a lot of time on what, for lack of a better description, is a small group of people, but a small group of people who are very much in need.
I think there's a lot that perhaps we can get back to you and your committee with as well. I know that our division, both Adult Protective Services and the Public Guardianship Office, work well with a lot of the Department of Behavioral Health staff and developmental disability staff, working on things. There's a lot in government that can't necessarily be sped up, would be nice. But I know I'll speak for Mr. Coleman's unit, who are putting out a lot of fires and literally driving all over the state of Georgia every day, as we are not county based. Mr. Coleman, his unit is the entire state. And it is certainly any information and that could be provided to the staff. I think Ms. Diaz's question also had to do with resources for persons leaving jail. I don't know if there's any extra resources or training. I think Carlton staff is so busy putting out fires and we try to do a lot of trainings and updates, but if there are new programs or services available that would help our population as well, sometimes we're a little bit delayed in finding out about that, just because they're so entrenched in serving the clients the best that they can. So there are things that can be done, but I agree with you. I commend Mr. Coleman and his unit so much for everything that they do.
And one thing that I would add, Judge Harris, is just having this committee meet, and that was even today before we did our presentation, just the update on the assisted outpatient treatment. The ODR was something I had never heard of. And I think that is a vital resource that I would like to tap into more. So when the committee meets and there's resources, please share those resources, because it would help us, because we're all out in the trenches even though we have different sectors that we're providing and servicing, we're all for the same common goal. You're muted, Judge Harris.
Sorry, Ansley Poitras is on. She's with DBHGD, may be able to answer some questions, and she might be able to answer this question, which is, are there any specialized facilities in Georgia for behavioral health, people with behavioral issues?
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me to participate today. So I have some background work experience with DBHDD and behavioral health, and I presently work for the division of DD. So I appreciate the comments and feedback today, and I look forward to taking that back to my team. Specifically to this question, so there are stabilization type of programs, but they are not, permanent residential programs, perhaps, that are like a large facility-based program. So we do have behavioral health residential treatment programs. I don't have as much information about those, but there are such types of placements for individuals. I think qualifying for those placements has changed since I worked with behavioral health.
Thank you. So now you have a contact, Ansley, Julia Carlton. Any other questions on this particular topic? Right. Thank you both so much for being here and presenting. It was very informative. I know we all learned a great deal. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to hear from on intensive and sustained engagement and treatment, INSET. And it is as an alternative or in addition to an assisted outpatient treatment program. It is a program that has apparently been done very successfully in New York and Wisconsin. And so we have Raquel Bender, who's the coordinator of integrated services at the Mental Health Association in Westchester, New York, and Stephanie Diaz, who's with GAO, and then Todd Lynch, who is serving as a certified peer specialist for the AOT program at Georgia Pines, which is the Thomasville area. So I don't know who's going to start, but I will turn it over to y'all.
Thank you so much, Judge Harris. I appreciate you giving us the time and everyone giving us the attention just to share some information about some additional programs and just other options that exist. So thank you so much. I have a presentation I think that I can share. You all see that?
Mhm.
Okay. And so I'm Stephanie Diaz, and I work at the Georgia Advocacy Office as the program director for the Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness program. And then with me is Raquel Bender from Westchester's Mental Health America affiliate, and she's the director and coordinator for the INSET program, which is Intensive and Sustained Engagement Team. So Raquel, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Raquel. I am as Stephanie said, the coordinator of INSET in Westchester County, New York. This is a pilot program that we started in 2018, and since then has gained some traction, and we've had some really great results so far. So I'm excited to speak about it today with Stephanie.
Thank you, Raquel. So a little bit about, I don't know if you can all hear that. There's like fire department going by, but many of you may know about the Georgia Advocacy Office. We're the protection and advocacy organization for the state. Every state has a PNA. Mostly it's known as disability rights. New York or Wisconsin. In Georgia, it's Georgia Advocacy Office, and our primary mission and vision is to support people with disabilities to live their best life and be able to be as involved in their community and just do things that everyone else has capabilities and abilities to do. So some of the things we're hoping to discuss today and kind of go over about INSET are to identify the benefits of INSET. It's a peer-led program, describe how it can impact self-determination, autonomy, and choice, and also discuss how it can serve as an alternative to AOT or in conjunction for people who are already enrolled in AOT or who meet AOT eligibility. So what is INSET? And I'll let Raquel discuss that. Thank you.
Okay, so INSET is a team of people. It's peer-led, but one of the for our team, I am the coordinator and team leader. I am a licensed clinician. I also am a peer, so I kind of come from both angles there. We provide mobile services, so we are out in the community and we are really connecting with people, as Stephanie said, who are eligible for AOT, on AOT, at risk of AOT, things like that. We are really trying to work with those people who, you know, you might feel like, I don't know what to do with them anymore. We've tried everything. They're not connecting. They're not engaging. We come in as, you know, peers and really do everything that we can to connect with them. And it's oftentimes a slow process. It's not, you know, a quick fix right away, but it is something that with the, you know, intensiveness that we're able to provide and the, like, we'll go out day after day and try to meet with people and really provide a lot of intensive support that we have had success. So it's a peer program. What makes it a little bit different from some other peer programs is really the ability to provide that quick, intense outreach and engagement and support.
Let me know when you want to go to the next.
Oh, the next slide's good. You know, so why INSET? People might be thinking like, you know, how is this different from any other program that we have? And the reality of it is that other programs don't always work for everybody. That's why we're here. So we need to have programs that are all, you know, alternatives to the traditional clinical models to be able to support people who are just not in a place where they're yet ready to engage consistently with the more traditional approaches. We do want to be there to support families as well. So yeah, so INSET is just different because we really, you know, strike when the iron's hot. We go out immediately. We use all of our peer values and, you know, everything that we can to connect with the individual, you know, wherever they are, literally and figuratively. You can go to the next. So INSET, we kind of just broke it down a little bit as to, you know, kind of what it stands for. So the intensity is that we are, you know, we're not going to force anybody to be in services, especially from a peer perspective. It's always voluntary, but we are going to be persistent. So that's the intensive nature of it. We're going to keep calling, we're going to keep going out, we're going to do whatever we can to really try to connect with people because, like I said, these are the individuals, you know, individuals that we're working with are the ones who are difficult to engage with for whatever reason. You know, oftentimes the system has failed them and they're just having a really difficult time trusting others. And we need to do everything that we can to establish that rapport and establish that trust. And by doing that, we just have to, keep showing up. And that's the biggest thing, is we keep showing up. Sustained engagement. We're working with people. There's no specific time frame. The way that we operate is we kind of have this pending or engagement period, where we are not necessarily saying that the person has officially agreed to be in our services and they're signing up for our program and they're signing our paperwork, and we're, the initial part of it is just connecting with them, building relationship, building trust, which can take, it could take 6 months. I mean, we could do it in a couple of days, we could do it in a month, 3 months, 6 months. So we really keep trying. Once we have really developed that relationship and built that trust, we do ask people to kind of officially be a part of our program in order to then start developing individualized recovery goals for working with the individual. So the first step is oftentimes like meeting their basic needs. What are the things that they need? What can we help them with? How can we help this person stay out of jail? How can we help this person stay out of the hospital? Does this person need food, shelter, whatever it is? And then, so that's a little bit more like, we're not care managers, but we do a little bit of that care management type work to really help the person. And then once they have agreed to be with us, we set up a recovery plan, that we call it, and we really work with them on their recovery goals. So I'm the team leader. I'm a peer and a clinician. It's not a clinical program, but it is nice to have a little bit of that clinical oversight when we're working with people that have mental health diagnoses. It's been really helpful actually to kind of break down some of the barriers with people who might be untrusting of, clinicians and sort of the traditional clinical model. Peer specialist, care manager, benefits specialist, who is a peer as well. Like I said, we don't do sort of the traditional care management work. I mean, we will do that if they don't have care management, but we do try to connect them to traditional care management as we can. And then a family support specialist that we do not have that, but it is a wish list item for us.
So a little bit about how INSEP might work in Georgia. It could very well be similar to what Raquel just described, or tailored more to the people who live in Georgia and their specific needs. As you all know, Georgia has a great peer specialist program, certified peer specialist program that is known, throughout the United States and even in other parts of the world. So definitely that being one of the main components of it, having that team leader, which I guess would kind of help navigate and put it all together. The care manager, that could look something like working with the providers and outpatient services in the community that people are already being supported by, such as those different ACT teams or case management that assist people with getting their housing, their supported employment, and all of those things. Benefits specialists, it's highly important because Social Security takes a long time when someone is first applying for it. And sometimes if someone's in an institution and that process is started and then they discharge because they're ready to live in the community, the process continues and it's sometimes lost. And then things have to start all over again. And it takes months for people to get the money that they need to be able to live. Family support specialists, as Raquel said, would be something else that would be wonderful to have family involved. However, as we all know, many people don't have family or don't have friends that are willing or able to support them. In that case, something such as supported decision-making could be beneficial in its place. So those are just some ideas of how INSET might work in Georgia. And we can go into some of the barriers and solutions. As Raquel explained earlier, really meeting people where they are when you first get to know them versus the person coming for an intake appointment and kind of being told, here are 20 different forms that you need to fill out. It's more of a person-centered and peer-centered approach, where you might get to know the person first and ask them, how are you doing today? What are your needs? When was the last time that you ate? And if the answer to that is 2 days ago, well, that takes priority then, because you can't focus on something if your immediate needs are not being met. So right now we're in this meeting. If someone here really has to use the bathroom, that's where their focus is, not in listening to what's happening and engaging in what's in front of us. So meeting those immediate needs is I think the first kind of part of this program.
Absolutely. So that really has been one of the biggest barriers is as an agency, having certain, because we're not a separate entity, we work as part of the agency. So the requirements for like intake and signing documentations and consents and things like that. So we really do have to have the buy-in from leadership that we can have this non-conventional approach and not approach people and say, here, you're going to be a part of this program, or we would like you to be part of this program, but you have to sign all of this stuff, because it's, a big thing is, we're very trauma informed, and having people oftentimes just sign a whole bunch of paperwork right off the bat could be, difficult and triggering for them. There is a bit of a challenge with the peer staff and feeling like we want to be as person-centered as possible. And if people are saying they don't want to work with us, and why are we like continuing to go out and try to work with them? And, like I said before, we're not forcing anybody to do anything. Obviously, everybody has their own say and informed choice, but we are going to be persistent with them to try to support them, because these are people who are either on AOT or at risk of AOT. And we do want to really remind them, like, you're kind of in a situation right now where it wouldn't be a bad thing to get some help from us. So, how can we kind of make this as easy as possible? Sort of referrals not being trusting as providers. So consistency, kindness, a lot of the things, and I'm sure this is everywhere, but at least in New York State, we have a lot of issues with housing and lack of housing and things like that. And a lot of people want us to be able to just kind of do these things for them or get them connected to all these services. And people get upset because they say you said that you're going to be able to do all these things for me and nothing's happening. And we just have to kind of remind people that we don't have a magic wand. We can't change anything in regards to their status on different housing lists and things like that, but we are going to be there to support them through the entire process. Because oftentimes people, they say, oh, the providers that I've worked with, they promised me all these things, or, they just put me on these lists and then I don't hear from them again. So we're going to be the people that are going to be able to stick with them throughout the entire process. So there is really that continuity of care. Next page. So the criteria, as we said, is just AOT eligible, involved, or a history of AOT.
And this slide kind of goes over the AOT eligibility in Georgia, which is being 18 years of age or older, experiencing a mental illness. And that is determined by a physician or psychologist. Also, the conditions would also say that the person is most likely not safe to live in the community. Also, history of not continuing treatment or not continuing with treatment related to substance use, having had different institutionalizations, being involved in forensic services, or being incarcerated 2 times within 3 years, and so on and so forth. Most of the requirements are the same in many of the states. So it's just information for you all to have or look at. And this is some information, since AOT in Georgia is in the pilot stages. Still, the number at the bottom is the total cost over a 3-year period of what one of the pilot program providers initiated or thought that it would more or less cost to support AOT over a 3-year period. And this information was obtained via open records request this past March. So it may not be the most updated since it's from March, and things have changed since then. Next slide is regarding the cost of care in a Georgia state facility. So based out of January of 2022, for someone to spend a day in a adult psychiatric facility, so that would be like Georgia Regional Atlanta or East Central in Augusta, it's about $600 per day. And some of the situations that might lead a person to be institutionalized or incarcerated are things that we've discussed previously: quality of life concerns, mandated treatment, services that don't really address the immediate needs or concerns of a person, and then lack of inclusion, service and recovery and treatment, not feeling connected to the provider, their family, or their community. And this was updated at the beginning of this meeting, so all of this information is not current, but it's from March. And it's the number of Georgians currently enrolled in AOT. So I'm not going to go over it because you received an update about that in the beginning of this meeting today. Now we'll go into a little bit more about why NCID is different.
So I think I spoke about this a little bit, but the primary focus is on engagement. And that's really the biggest thing that we, we try to explain is that, we can't force anybody to do anything. We want to encourage people to work with us and to get the support without being forceful. And we do include the clinical peer family. We include all perspectives. Okay. No set agenda. We respond to the person's immediate needs, like what Stephanie spoke about earlier today. We always try to link people to traditional services when possible, but we will provide those supports and services to them before they are connected. Okay. The outcomes that we've seen are reduced hospitalizations, both frequency and length of stay, reduced incarcerations, and much more engagement in voluntary services, and reduced need for mandated services. Of all of the people that we have worked with who, I think we've had about maybe 200 something people that we've worked with, like 90% of them are AOT eligible, and none of them have been referred for AOT. What's been really nice is, okay, these are the numbers for, yeah, okay, so I was right. None of, once we're able to really engage with the person and that they trust us, they allow us to be a part of their treatment team in a way, like let us connect to their other providers and their other supports and services so that we can help advocate for them and with them. And we have been able to really like avoid different crises and things that I think historically would have led to hospitalization, because we are there to, you know, for the individual to reach out to if they're having an issue with their therapist or an issue with whoever it is, right? And in the past, the person might have said, I would have just like gone crazy or lashed out or whatever, but they kind of had us to really fall back on. And we've had an 83% engagement rate for a population that, you know, is described as hard to engage and non-compliant and needs forced treatment and all of these things. So just the fact that the people are willing to work with us and speak with us and engage with us is really has been huge. So it's cost effective for us. These numbers are going to be very different than for Georgia, but in New York State, one night stay in for psych is like upwards of $3,000 or something. So it's very, you know, being able to prevent anything, any hospitalizations, or, you know, at least decreasing the length of stay is very cost effective.
Yes, so like Raquel stated, this is based on New York's daily per diem, which is over $3,000. So for everyone who is a numbers person, the daily rate is around $600 in Georgia. And so you can kind of figure out and average the math that way.
So I don't know how much time we have. I don't know if we're, you know, we should get into the case examples.
I think you can keep going. I know we ran over in the last one, so I want to be able to give you plenty of time. If any of our participants do need to go to the restroom, please do.
Mhm.
But we're going to keep going as best as we can. So I want to make
Okay.
sure y'all get through your slides and
Mhm.
that Todd has a chance to speak as well.
Okay, so this is just one person who the numbers are on here, but basically she was hospitalized for almost an entire year. She got out of the hospital, showed up at one of our local community centers and was really just not doing well. So we did end up having to have her get re-hospitalized because I don't know how she was discharged, honestly, but the point is that we supported her through that. We went to the hospital with her. We, you know, had her, like, we were there by her side the entire time. Once she was hospitalized, we visited her regularly. We engaged with her. We were part of, you know, we were able to, you know when she was going to be discharged, so we could kind of be a part of that plan. She did acknowledge that she, at this time, was going to the hospital more regularly because she felt safer there than being in the shelter. We, you know, can't change anything in regards to her being in the shelter, but we were able to also support her and help connect her to things during the day so that she didn't have to spend as much time at the shelter. So we engaged with her daily, regularly. We have non-traditional hours, so we can work evenings and weekends, and we have a warm line that we use, like a 24/7 warm line. So she was connected to everything. And we were able to, you know, assist her in finding stable housing in mid-July. And since then, she has not returned to the hospital. So it's been, you know, she's been an incredible success story where there have been some hiccups, you know, as we know, mental health is not linear, but we've been able to be there to support her and help her sort of like navigate getting into her own housing and what that was like for her. So she's just really been a great success story. And she also is now interested in taking training to become a peer specialist, which is really cool. Another person, he had been on AOT. He's another one. He when we started working with him, he had just gotten off of AOT, I believe, but was able to remain off of AOT since working with us, didn't have any hospitalizations, also took our training. And he's become a very, has spoken about INSET and how it's been extremely beneficial and helpful for him. So he's been a great support of ours.
Right, and then this is pretty much the end of our presentation. So just some final thoughts for you to take away is that it may serve as an alternative or in conjunction with AOT. It's a peer-led program which meets people where they are by people who've experienced what recovery looks like. It prevents involuntary treatment, institutionalization, incarceration. And I guess, I don't know, we just had this great presentation on guardianship, maybe even can serve as a prevention of guardianship in some cases, maybe, depending on how you might look at it. So there are some questions, maybe, I think. Yeah, how many, and I don't know if maybe Todd should move on. And so
let me just ask real quick, because I think this is relevant. Is this, I think someone asked this, is INSET a evidence-based program? Is that a goal that you're working toward?
Well, peer support in general is evidence-based. INSET is not necessarily, but we are in the works of New York State Office of Mental Health has. So our model is the first model that we have put together, but now New York State is in the works of offering money to start up, I believe, four new INSET teams across the state. So it's something that's definitely gaining more traction and more people are noticing it.
What is your budget?
Our initial, I don't know. That's a good question. I could find out. This one is going to be 800. This one that they're giving that for New York State, it's, I think, 800. Well, it's an RFP, like 800,000 for 4 years or something. I'd have to look and see. Our startup budget, yeah, it's an RFP with the Office of Mental Health in New York State. Our startup was 500,000, and we did not. We haven't spent a lot. I mean, of course we spend money, but I have to say, in all honesty, it has been we've spent less than I have expected.
How are you receiving your referrals?
We receive referrals from hospitals. We receive them from the AOT coordinator himself. So, like Stephanie had said, it could be an alternative to AOT, or it could be in conjunction with AOT. So we might even be on the AOT order, which is a little kind of an oxymoron, right? Because we're not a forced program. So it's known that they do not have to work with us by any means, but oftentimes we will be on the order as well, or our local clinics. We kind of get referrals from throughout the county.
And INSET is not you aren't providing treatment.
We're not, no. We're just strictly a peer program, just providing support and other, kind of like case management light and things like that to people.
Right.
So we do try to connect people to traditional services, and we'll do whatever we can to help support that. Going to appointments with people. I mean, really, we'll do anything that we possibly can, but we're not providing traditional clinical services.
Does anyone have any other questions? I was looking to see if we had any questions on the list but I don't know that you can answer how many peers we have in Georgia. So, all right. Okay. All right. We also have Todd Lynch, who is the support specialist, peer support specialist for the AOT program, Georgia Pines. And we're thrilled to have you here and appreciate your work there. Todd, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate the offer to be here today. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, didn't get a chance to check my mic beforehand, but I am with the Georgia Pines AOT program. We've established at the beginning of the year, but we didn't become fully staffed until April. We currently have 15 clients active and another 15 that are either in the investigation or referral process. And when I say active, that means they've already been mandated or there is a petition waiting to be adjudicated. Of those 15 clients, I would say 14 out of 15, their biggest need right now is housing stability. And we're definitely running into a hard time addressing that with these clients. Many of them were referred to us through our crisis center or through the courts directly as familiar faces. And we are doing everything we can to try to stop this cycle of in and out of inpatient facilities and ERs and crisis centers. But sometimes the clients feel that's the only option they have. But we are seeing some results. We have one client specifically who has been just an absolute model for what this program can do since he was mandated. He's working with America Works to try to get into employment. He has made every appointment that we've set. He's responded every time we've reached out to him. He's got his mother is working with him, and he's in a stable environment. He's participating in therapy. So it's been a fantastic journey with him. We've got a couple other clients who, once they were into the program, they requested treatment, substance use treatment. We have one that was just released from the program at St. Isla's. And she's actually in the office right now getting her behavioral health reassessment. So, we're trying to move a lot of these things on, a lot of issues on for these folks. A lot of them need assistance applying for or reapplying for Social Security, disability, SSI, things of that nature, food stamps, SNAP. And, we're just trying to support them as best we can, as well as, linking them with services that we offer here at Georgia Pines, as well as other services in the community that they may not have been aware of. One of our biggest resources has actually been the Wellness Center in Moultrie. The program that we're running now, the pilot, is in Thomas and Colquitt counties. And with Moultrie being in Colquitt, a lot of our clients aren't even aware that the Wellness Center existed. But that is giving them somewhere to go where they can have extra peer support, possible respite stay if required, and access to other resources. So, the program is, I've said it several times, we're still kind of putting the car together as we drive it down the road. But so far it's been running pretty smooth.
Todd, thank you. It's always good to hear that some of the programs we've proposed and put together are working. I know it's taken some time. One question that I have for you is, I know in some of the other, and I know you're on some of the meetings that we have across the state about AOT. One of the problems we've had is hiring. I think you were the first certified peer specialists that we were able to hire in the program. We've had a problem with being able to hire those persons, do you have any insight or suggestions as to how that could be improved?
Honestly, I had anticipated this being a problem or a concern from the moment AOT was proposed, for the reason that from a peer perspective, any mention of the word involuntary is an automatic shutdown. A lot of peers that I've worked with don't want anything to do with any program that has involuntary anywhere associated with the title, because of a misconception. They don't understand exactly what the program is, what it can do. And I'm running into that from a peer perspective, as well as working with our referrals and our clients. Once it's explained to them and they understand the benefits that can come from this program, most of them are 100% buy-in. They're more than willing to cooperate and move forward with the program. The same as with peers that I've spoken to. They believe that this is just another form of 1013, that they're going to be held in a facility against their will, or if they don't listen, they're going to immediately be held. And it's just not true. And I think that's part of the reason why there may be an issue getting peers for this program. I certainly understand why there's hesitance from the peer perspective to have any involvement with anything involuntary. I certainly understand that trauma has been experienced in the past with some involuntary programs. But my response to that is I don't believe the trauma was the involuntary aspect of the program. It was just the way it was implemented and possibly received. That's just my opinion. But I believe that these programs need to exist. The only reason I'm in the position I'm in today is because involuntary treatment was an option. And I did not want to go down that road, so I pursued treatment voluntarily and on my own. So it was a deterrent for me, and it was very helpful because I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And I think if we can get peers on board and get buy-in with programs like these, we'll have a lot more participation, especially if it's explained. All right, you don't like the program, well, be a part of it and be the change from the inside. Make sure it's done the way that we think it should be as peers. Make sure that there's nothing about us without us. So get involved. I think if we can get that kind of buy-in, or at least the listening from the peer perspective, this could really be a real good thing for Georgia and the peer network.
Right. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions? And Todd, I don't know if you can answer this question. Someone asked how many certified peer specialists there are that are available for employment. That probably has to come from Mental Health America. Is that?
The CPS mental health is through Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network, so they would have the number.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the CPS AD would be Counsel and Recovery. I don't have the exact numbers. I do know it's pretty significant.
Okay. So when you say that, those are people that have already been trained and have already been through the program and have certification.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And I also understand that there have been some obstacles to employment because if you're being employed by the state, you have to have a criminal background check. Do you think there is a way that we could shorten that process to get those waivers, to get some people employed? Would that be helpful?
Absolutely. I can think of at least 4 or 5 different peers just personally that I know that would be in positions right now if there was some kind of change or waiver or appeal process for the background check requirement. I certainly understand it. I certainly agree with it. But I think especially when you're working with a peer perspective, there needs to be consideration that, a lot of us have a past, and we've moved beyond that. But the record's going to be there. and until we can get it cleared up. Thank you, Stephanie. So just at least, if not doing away with the requirement, I don't want to see that, but a quicker appeals process if something does happen to come up.
Right. Thank you. Does anyone else, I don't mean to take up all the questions. Does anyone else have any questions they want to ask? All right. If not, all right, this has been so informative. Mr. Lynch, thank you very much. It does, I always like to hear good stories with good endings, and yours is certainly that. And we really appreciate all that you're doing and appreciate you being here and sharing your perspective. And I'm certainly excited about what's going on down in Thomas and Colquitt County.
I am as well. Thank you.
That's really exciting. And I'm going to, just for everyone else who might not know this, the other two counties that have gotten started, they kind of had a head start a bit on Thomas County and Colquitt in that area, because they were already doing mandated outpatient treatment in a lot of cases. I know y'all were doing some, but not nearly the scale in other places. So they really jumped in. It's been a great team. So I think it's one of the things we can say is definitely a success of House Bill 1013. Anyway, is there anything else that anyone wants to share? Anyone on the committee would like to share or say before we leave? All right. Well, thank you all for your
I believe
time.
you have a hand up, Judge.
Oh, okay. I don't know who it is, but whoever it is, go ahead.
It's me, Judge Harris. Thank you. It's Stephanie from GAO again. I just wanted to say thank you to you and everyone else on the committee for giving us the time and attention. And yes, I mean, hopefully this can lead to more conversations about peer support and leading the way, and programs that really focus on people's needs versus kind of mandated programs. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, everyone. We will send out a notice when we have our next meeting. And I appreciate all your attention. Sorry, we ran a little bit over, but I think we kind of caught back up. All right, thanks, everyone, and have a good day.